But I wonder, does anybody have any questions for Jennifer?
Barbara, this is Catherine Smith.
Hi.
Hey, I was able to join. It's been fascinating. Jennifer, I work for the National Capital Region of the National Park Service, and I think our two agencies overlap enormously because we're looking at a lot of the same properties or adjacent properties, and we're very concerned with things like the L'Enfant Plan and the mall and views and vistas. Mm-hmm. We also have folks here actively working on cultural landscape inventories, as you mentioned, the one at the Washington Monument Grounds. But we've recently, in recent years, been attempting to update National Register nominations using all this cultural landscape inventory and documentation that has been going on through Park Service initiatives. So it's unfortunately, I think we're sunsetting our special funding source for National Register updates. But I would be interested in meeting with you and talking about, along with maybe our cultural landscape lead, about how we can help you and how we can let you know what's going on in our office. I quickly pulled out the A map and saw that Mount Vernon Square is not ours anymore. We gave it away for whatever reason,
right.
Like a lot of the reservations in the plan. But we as you know, manage many of the pieces and parts. And I wonder if we have lots of research too. I mean, lots of archives that talk about the acquisition and the management of those reservations over time.
Right. Yeah. We often are working with you said you're with the region?
Yeah, I'm in the Cultural Resources Division.
Okay.
I'm not sure who you may be working with the Planning and Design Office, I'm not sure, or our Compliance Office.
Right. That, or we're working directly with the park that's involved.
Right.
Yeah,
so, exactly.
But, yeah, it would be lovely to hear what you're working on and doing. I mean, I know I don't know if you're involved with I think there's a CLI about to be done for Pennsylvania Avenue. That's the other thing I guess I should have mentioned is that there's a lot of concern about an initiative NCPC is undertaking about the planning for Pennsylvania Avenue,
mm-hmm.
and part of that will be there's a question that's come up about the eligibility of the landscape features of the 1974 Pennsylvania Avenue plan.
Right, and that I work closely with Maureen Joseph, who's on that team, or she's putting together the team, I think, that's going to do the CLI. I think that it's actually a very interesting question. One, urban landscapes, and two, modernist landscapes, because D.C. has a lot of them.
Right.
As far as modern planning initiatives, and when you were talking, it made me think about how every agency how many agencies are involved in planning, and it must be the most overplanned city in the world, it seems, as far as like we go through one plan and then we move to the next plan, and and then we have overlapping plans and we're all trying to coordinate what we're doing. But so I do think that we, at least at the National Capital Region, are starting to bring, or probably we've developed a lot of documentation, but getting it to the National Register level, and I have struggled, and Barbara knows this because we've had conversations, but getting it properly, like you say, into the nominations so that it's clear to those using those nominations for Section 106 what are the characteristics, and and how a landscape really is just setting. It's not to denigrate. It's just saying that it is part of a district. I mean, all parts of that district that give it its feeling and its association are,
mm-hmm.
Are features that contribute. But how to be able to quickly get at that and how to make that understandable to folks who may not sit around thinking about landscape all day long, I think that's a real challenge.
Right.
Well, it sounds like you all have some follow-up work to do.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question?
I have a question for Jennifer. If NCPC doesn't have the landscape information they need to fully understand the square, will they be doing a CLR?
We may look at doing that. I mean, we are still looking into what is existing documentation that we have on hand.
Well, that's kind of a question I had was about the the library and the library grounds, it looked like, and maybe that was just totally schematic, the drawings that you showed, where you were showing sort of an evolution of the site. But it was, I was a little bit alarmed at the sort of the end point. It looked like quite a departure from the more rectilinear site plan that has been in over time, and I wondered if the current alignment of walks goes back to the 1899. Was it designed with the 1899 building, or can you shed a little light on that?
I don't think. I mean, I think the walkways and the paths themselves through Mount Vernon Square have been heavily altered, and so I mean that archway, the proposed arc is. I mean, yeah, it is quite a departure from what you see in some of the historic plans, but it's not a total departure from what's out there today.
Okay, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot, but I was curious about the history. Linda has a point.
Yeah, I guess related also to Barbara's thing is how are you going to deal with period of significance for a resource such as this? And Barbara was asking you about the alignment of the walks, of course, any plantings as well. Do you go back and research to look at all of the plans that are available and look at the degree to which they had been executed? We in the Register, of course, if we were going to look at new documentation, we would be asking those questions. We would be asking about period changes, and we, of course, would love to see graphics that illustrate the grounds and the development of the grounds at different points in history. Mm-hmm. So I get the feeling that you don't know much about the history of grounds development. And if this were a new project that hadn't already been listed on the Register, you would go out and you would document that at this time, because that's what our documentation standards are. So what do you do when you have a nomination that doesn't go there, but that you know you have to at least assess the eligibility, assess the historic integrity? And I'm talking about period of significance now, because you're not only talking the period of the original construction, but how did that over time in relationship to some of these other changes for the plans of Washington? Mm-hmm. So my question is, at what point will you go back and look at that evolution of the footprint, the ground plan around the library?
I mean, right now that's what we've asked the landscape architect to do. I mean, you're asking all very good questions. I mean, I don't have a, I guess, definitive answer for you right now. I mean, there's no doubt, obviously, that the site is historic in and of itself. I mean, a reservation is part of the L'Enfant plan. I think it's a question of, what is the integrity of the landscape today, and so, and are there features out there that we should be working to make sure that are either incorporated into the new design? And so, I mean, I think we're still trying to answer those specific questions.
Well, I'm wondering why you're not asking the question of what doesn't have historic integrity here. Assuming that there's a layer of historic significance there, even if it doesn't date to the same period as the construction of the library. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm saying you approach something like this and you assume, because in recent history, no one knows of that being altered or changed.
This is Catherine Smith again. Just to bring up a similar project that we worked on here at the region, we recently, we have in draft form a CLI, Cultural Landscape Inventory for DuPont Circle, and it's a similar. I mean, it's not unusual in DC to have the circles or the squares have changed circulation patterns over time. And I had a conversation with our historic landscape architect who was doing that CLI about periods of significance and when to end our period of significance, because there were elements of the 19th century DuPont Circle plan that were there layered on top of that was, some of it got taken out in the, I think it was the 20s or 30s. So we tend to be as broad in our periods of significance as we can. So that ended up being it still had integrity for its 19th century Victorian plan, but layered on top of that is are changes that came about in the 20s or 30s when we were, and that also reflected changes in function and use of the circle. So we tend to look at it in a very layered way, but it can get really confusing because when you step back and you look at it from National Register standards, I come from outside the Park Service, and I'm used to looking at districts as a whole and saying, does it have integrity? You know, it has these buildings and these pieces, and the streets are in the same alignments and whatnot. But ultimately, for me, sometimes it comes out, what do I see when I see this landscape? Am I seeing 1920, or am I seeing, can I still recognize enough of the elements? So I tend to set a fairly high standard. However, we try and be as broad as we can and, incorporate resources and changes over time as long as they're reflecting important trends or important events or designs. So I don't know anything about Mount Vernon Square, but it sounds like, hopefully ongoing research will kind of get at, when were these sidewalks laid down in this format in 1970, or was it done in 1910?
I think we're talking about a method of approaching these landscape questions when we have a lack of documentation. And I think we can assume that most National Register nominations are not going to have that level of detail that we want and need for our planning purposes when it comes down to a specific project like this. And I agree with you, Catherine, about sort of looking at what time is this place. I mean, just as architectural historians look at architectural character, there are characteristics that speak to landscape historians as well, towards the time and period. And I would think that there probably was substantial change done during the 30s here as part of the public works programs.
Yeah.
And maybe there were things done afterwards, but I think I'd shoot for the 30s and find out what was done here then.
Well, I think we better cut this one off, but you've raised a great project, and I will say that it is a lovely site. I walked by it on my way from Union Station to I Street, and it's got it does appear totally underutilized. Has beautiful mature oak trees, and I'll be curious to see how it evolves. But I think a lot of provocative questions have been raised about it that no doubt will continue to be, I hope, raised by your team there. But Jennifer, thank you so much for the presentation, and keep in touch with us on how these things are evolving.